Hello all you mask-wearing cosmonauts, as always I am Cosmic and today we're going to be reviewing Absolver. Absolver of course is the new game from Slowclap and Devolver Digital. It is described by themselves as an online melee action game. It is akin to a cross between Dark Souls and a third-person fighter. And the way Absolver works is that you play as a character in this relatively not massive open world, but it's a decent size, and incorporated into that is an online system whereby when you go into a given area, then players will be put into that area with you, so you get dynamic encounters online. So there's a decent online component there, and this means that as you're going through you'll meet other characters. So if you're getting beaten up by 4 NPCs for example, then another player can come and save you, or vice versa, he can turn on you and pound your face into the ground. And this dynamic experience, I have to say from the outset, I was a little skeptical of, because we've seen so many games who say, well, you know, you're going to have dynamic encounters with other players, and then it turns out that either they don't exist or that they are really not well implemented at all. Absolver really implements it very well. I was quite surprised and thrilled by the fact that the online encounter system works really well. It adds a new dynamic to the game, and I think it is almost integral to Absolver's experience, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So first, let's start with the core of the gameplay. Absolver works around a very straightforward system, almost Dark Souls-esque, whereby you go out into the world, you fight NPCs, you gain experience, you gain new loot, and then you have to improve your character over time and level them up to the point where you're going to be able to take on a boss and just keep going into harder difficulty areas, harder difficulty enemies, and just keep improving your character. Now, the progression of each character works a little bit differently. So you have a level up system whereby you improve your stats, so you can improve strength, dexterity, that kind of thing. You also have an item system whereby you improve your equipment. Equipment has variety of stats and will affect you in different ways. So heavy armor, for example, is going to give you less speed, which will affect your damage, and lighter clothing is going to give you a damage bonus and a mobility bonus, which is going to make you a faster fighter. Then you also have a shard system whereby you have a limited number of special abilities such as Earthquake or Heal, and these can only be used once in every certain number of times until it has to regenerate and you have to pick up more shards. And then you also have a combat system, progression system, whereby you learn new martial arts moves and then you can incorporate them into your combat deck. And your deck is expanded as you gain levels, and so you can basically customize your character down to each move that you make as you press a combo. So you can change out your combos, you can mess with the system to make it more, for example, I like to focus on really heavy damaged, more slow hits, and what it ended up being was that I was using a lot of elbows and a lot of strikes that would guard break, but it would end up my character being a lot slower than someone who's using less damage but more faster paced moves. So I often found that when I was facing down an opponent who was a lot faster than I was and who was using multiple jabs and multiple kicks, lower power, lower damage but faster, I would have to really time my shots very well, otherwise they would be able to just move around me very, very quickly and just own the crap out of me, basically. Now, the combat itself works really, really well. It is polished and very fluid. I love the fact that there's a stance system that's in play here, so you can change stances, and depending on your stance will depend on what combo you do. And there's a real depth within this combat system that works really, really well. You know, dodging, parrying, blocking, and then making sure that you're in a good stance, that you know your combos. It's all really fast paced, it's fluid, it's polished, and at the same time it has a decent amount of depth and meat to the combat system. And I have to say that it's got a little bit of a learning curve within it. So the first time I played, the first couple of hours, really struggled to get to grips with the combat system, became a little bit frustrating, so put the game down and then came back a couple of hours later a lot calmer, and then really tried to get to grasp with it. And then once I did, and once you get over that initial learning curve, you find Absolver's combat to be really, really satisfying. And I would argue it's more satisfying for me personally more than something like Dark Souls. Pulling off a great combo in Absolver feels really damn good, and that's something that just never really goes away. Pulling off that combo, doing some heavy damage in Absolver just really is so gratifying, and you just never get over that. Whether it's against an NPC, a boss, or another human player, it is just a really solid combat system that works really well, and all props to them for making that combat system so gratifying, so satisfying, and of course really fluid. Now let's talk about the online experience, because I mentioned earlier that there's a dynamic online component to this, which is of course encounters. So you're going to have human players in your world, in any given area. You're going to be able to see them, they're going to be roaming around, they're going to be able to attack you, you're going to be able to work with each other. The communication between players is very limited in the game by design. So what that does, that adds tension, and it adds a unique experience to the game that I think without it the game would be a little bit stale, because NPCs themselves are always going to spawn in the same locations. They're going to be, you know, a set AI, they're going to have a set movement scale, and you know, they're fairly predictable in that way. Certainly challenging in some areas, but predictable nonetheless. And the human online component adds a really nice dynamic to the whole experience of Absolver. So, you know, you can decide to work with people, and you know, if someone's fighting a boss or you're fighting a boss, someone can come and help you if they see you in trouble, or vice versa. You know, there was a really great experience where I was, you know, facing down 4 NPCs. I was likely going to die, and then, you know, someone came and helped me destroy the crap out of them. Vice versa, you know, I ran into the PC Gamer guys, Tyler, and what happened there was that they were, you know, we were fighting and we ended up getting into a fight ourselves. It was me versus them. They of course eventually destroyed my face because they had weapons and much better gear than I did, but I never felt outclassed ever, even against opponents where they had much better moves than I did, or at least they had access to more moves than me. You never really feel outclassed. There's always a really good skill element involved in Absolver, and so unless you're facing down, you know, 2 versus 1 or 3 versus 1, and you're really outmatched and outgunned, then there's always a chance that you can pull it round in Absolver because it's hand-to-hand combat, and it's just something that I feel makes the game just so much richer in its experience because of that online component, and I think without it, it would be a much lesser game. Now, aside from the core gameplay, Absolver looks fantastic. Visually, technically, it just is wonderful. It runs really well, it looks phenomenal, the stylized art style of the game is just wonderful. I mean, it really is breathtaking. The environments are great, characters look good, and it's just something that visually and audibly is just a pleasure to experience. That said, there are a couple of minor gripes with Absolver for me. One, the matchmaking system on the 1v1 outside of the game world is a little bit problematic. I did experience some lag issues there, definitely did experience some matchmaking whereby I was coming against a lot stronger opponents than I was, but it's something that likely over time is going to get better. The other problem was that I felt that the loot system could have been extended and really fleshed out. I felt that the loot system itself wasn't fleshed out enough. There were specific places where you can get loot, and enemies do drop loot on occasion, but it's very rare. And then you have the story. The story itself is an interesting story. The world is interesting, and I certainly would have liked to know more about the world, but the story just wasn't enough for me. I think that it was a really underutilized resource within the game. It would have been really nice to have a really, you know, story that was engaging all the way through, some interesting cutscenes, more interesting cutscenes I should say, and it just felt really underutilized and underdeveloped in some aspects of that. The game does have a couple of bugs here and there. For the most part, it is a very smooth, fluid experience, but do be prepared at this point to come across some interesting and albeit not game-breaking, but noticeable bugs along the way. Now, it should be noted that if you don't like fighting games, this probably isn't for you. If you don't like games like Dark Souls, this probably isn't for you. However, if you do like those type of games, Absolver is fantastic. Listen, for $30, it is an experience that you really should have. You know, if this game was $60, I would say there's just not enough content here, right? Like, it's not on the content level of something like Dark Souls 3. But for $30, it is a really enjoyable experience, a really fun game, and the online component of that dynamic encounter system just works so well and is so enjoyable that it, you know, ultimately makes it worth every single penny of that $30. I think if you're in the set of I'm a Dark Souls fan or I'm a fighting game fan, if you're any kind of fan of those type of genre games, then it's a definite buy. If you're not a big fan of those, like you're not a die-hard player of those, then I would say wait for a sale, pick it up, and I think that you're going to have a fantastic time. Even if this isn't your core demographic of game, you're still going to have a really fun time with Absolver. It's certainly worth playing. It's a really enjoyable experience, graphically, visually, audibly. It's brilliant. And then of course I think that the combat systems and some of the mechanics at work here just work so well together. They complement each other very well, and I think that the overall execution of the game is top notch. Certainly one of the better games this year. And that is my review of Absolver. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, make sure to subscribe, and as always, I will see you next time.